Hello and shalom. Welcome to Module 8. I'm your presenter, Caitlin Barr. We've made it to the last week. Applying social psychology. Social psychology is a highly impactful field. An understanding of social psychological concepts can help us to identify problems and contribute practical solutions in a wide range of areas. In this module, we look at the applications of social psychology in the realms of law, business, and health and well-being. This week's materials cover chapters 12, 13, and 14 of our social psychology textbook by Cass and Fina Marcus, and 2 assigned articles. One on the influence of misinformation on memory after stressful events by Morgan and colleagues, and another regarding an integrated approach to leadership development by Siebert and colleagues. So let's get started. Law. Chapter 12 of our social psychology textbook examines applications of social psychology to the law. Evidence, such as eyewitness testimony, is subject to social influence and contains great potential for bias and error. Our textbook singles out 3 conclusions based on research on the subject of eyewitness testimony. First, eyewitnesses are imperfect. Second, certain personal and situational factors can systematically influence their performance. And third, judges, jury, and lawyers are not adequately informed about these factors. Phenomena such as the weapons focus effect and cross-race identification bias can further complicate one's perception of a crime and can lead to mistaken identity and wrongful arrests. There are 2 types of false confessions which can occur: confessions as a result of compliance, to escape a stressful situation in obedience to an authority figure, and confessions as the result of internalization, when innocent people come to believe they are guilty of the crime. The presentation of false evidence and a lack of clear memory increase the risk of a false confession taking place. Jury decision-making in the United States involves 3 primary stages: jury selection, the presentation of evidence, arguments, and instructions, and the process by which juries deliberate to reach a verdict. Stereotypes and human bias can interfere in the process. The evidence may not be accurate or reliable. Jurors may harbor misconceptions or bias from extraneous factors. Judges' instructions may fall on deaf ears, and the process of deliberation may cause some jurors to vote for a verdict that contradicts their beliefs. Nevertheless, as a general rule, research has shown that juries are sound decision makers, even in cases containing complex evidence, and that jury verdicts are based largely on the strength of the evidence presented at trial. That's from Casson et al., page 536. Sentencing disparity and the prison experience are 2 additional areas of interest to social psychologists. This chapter of our textbook takes an additional look at the Stanford Simulated Prison Experiment by Zimbardo and colleagues, beginning on page 547. Finally, a perception of justice is important from a practical standpoint and of interest to social psychologists because it makes the system appear fair and helps foster cooperation. Chapter 13 of our social psychology textbook addresses the social side of business. Social factors play an important role in the workplace and even influence economic decisions. The famous Hawthorne Project from the 1920s was a series of experiments that took place at the Hawthorne plant of the Western Electric Company that laid the foundation for industrial and organizational psychology and revealed an important effect, which came to be known as the Hawthorne effect, which is the finding that workers who were given special attention increased their productivity regardless of what actual changes were made in the work setting. Social psychology research presents important findings in the areas of recruiting and developing competent work staff by minimizing bias and error in the interview and performance appraisal processes, as well as sheds light on how to effectively implement affirmative action and maximize a company's cultural and organizational diversity. Social psychology also has important implications on the issue of leadership in the workplace. Fluctuations in the stock market can be complicated by social reasons such as the endowment effect, in which people tend to inflate the value of objects, goods, or services they already own, and the escalation effect, the tendency for people to persist in failing investments to avert loss, which causes losses to mount. Keeping the sunk cost principle in mind by considering only future costs and benefits, but not past commitments, can help alleviate investment losses. The 14th and final chapter of our social psychology textbook explores the social psychology of physical and mental health. Social psychologists are uniquely equipped to deal with topics relating to health and well-being because human beings are inherently social creatures, and our psychological well-being can be both damaged and repaired by our relationships with other people. Health is a joint product of biological, psychological, and social factors. That's a quote from page 602 in our Casson and colleagues textbook. Causes of stress. Stressors can be sorted into three major categories: catastrophes, such as war or natural disasters, major life events, such as a birth, death, or divorce, and daily hassles, which are also called microstressors and include things like noise, commuting to and from work, and financial pressure. It is important to note that studies suggest that the accumulation of daily hassles contributes more to illness than do major life events. Interpersonal conflicts are the most upsetting of our daily stressors and have a particularly long-lasting impact. That's a quote from page 608 of our textbook. Stresses effect on the body. Stress is an adaptive short-term response to a threat, but compromises our health and well-being when experienced for prolonged periods of time. Interestingly, research shows that men tend to have a fight or flight reaction to stress, whereas women tend to have a tend and befriend response, which may be facilitated by increased levels of the hormone oxytocin. The negative impact of psychological stress on one's physical health should not be underestimated. Stress has been documented to increase one's risk of coronary heart disease and is known to compromise the immune system. Process of appraisal. I was pleasantly surprised to see that our social psychology textbook references the biblical account of Job as a good example of the process of appraisal, which involves considering possible explanations for suffering and forming expectations about one's ability to cope with his or her situation. Learned helplessness, resilience, self-efficacy, and dispositional optimism are psychological phenomena that can factor into the appraisal process. Thankfully, many coping strategies are available to deal with stress, most of which occur within a social context. Coping strategies can be divided into two primary approaches: problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping. Social support and religion can proactively serve as a buffer against stress, and coping styles may differ according to one's cultural influence. Health psychologists try to find ways to improve the development of treatment and prevention programs through social influences, and one example of social support is psychotherapy. Happiness levels have been found to vary among cultures, but overall there are three key predictors of happiness: social relationships, employment status, and physical and mental health. The upward and downward comparisons of social comparison theory provide an explanation for why increases in wealth, up and above a basic amount, do not noticeably raise happiness levels. The article, Misinformation Can Influence Memory for Recently Experienced Highly Stressful Events, was research of military personnel under stressful training conditions. There was a mock prisoner of war camp, and it demonstrated that memories of stressful events are highly vulnerable to error, even among individuals whose training might be thought to prevent such mistakes. This is an example of the misinformation effect that appears on page 513 of our social psychology textbook by Casson and colleagues, which is defined as the tendency for false post-event misinformation to become integrated into people's memory of an event. It appears to occur outside a person's awareness. This study found that exposure to misinformation on an individual level led to false memories, and exposure to misinformation on a group level led to false memories about an event that participants experienced together as a group. Our second article, Linking Developmental Experiences to Leader Effectiveness and Promotability, Self-Efficacy and Mentor Network. Here's a quote from the article that does a good job of summing it up. Because leadership is an inherently social activity, developmental experiences must enhance the individual's social capabilities if they are to be successful. So based on social cognitive and social capital theories, This study collected survey data from managers and their supervisors in a large Australian retail organization. The final sample consisted of 235 manager-supervisor pairs. They gathered data pertaining to formal development programs, developmental job challenges, developmental supervision, leadership self-efficacy, mentor network, leadership effectiveness, and promotability. And just as a reminder, self-efficacy is defined as a person's belief that he or she is capable of the specific behavior required to produce a desired outcome in a given situation. That's from page 621 of our Casson and colleagues textbook. The purpose of this study in the article was to test a mediated model that links managers' exposure to these three types of developmental experiences: formal development programs, developmental job challenges, and developmental supervision, to their leadership effectiveness and promotability. The study found, consistent with social cognitive and social capital theories, that developmental job challenges relate to leadership effectiveness and promotability indirectly through leadership self-efficacy and one's mentor network. These findings also support the idea that leadership self-efficacy mediates the relationship between formal development programs and leadership capacity, but only when leaders experience either low levels of both developmental job challenges and developmental supervision, or high levels of both. That's from page 27 of the article. Here are this week's questions. I will also post the text on the discussion thread on Blackboard for you as well. And here are this week's references. Good luck on the exam, everybody.